Well, hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for being a part of this second quarter College of Arts and Science Colloquium of the 2020 Colloquia series, Learning from Men of Color, Constructing Culturally Responsive Academic and Student Service Systems. I would like to welcome our presenter, Dr. Newton Miller, who I count as a personal friend and mentor. He has been committed to the education arena since 1990 when he converted non-traditionally from the ranks of the engineering field. Since then, he has served as a secondary and college level mathematics instructor, secondary science teacher, assistant principal, and educational consultant for a national education reform organization. His research interest lies within educating at potential populations, focusing on systematic thinking tied to student achievement, effective school cultures, and facilitating programming and instruction that promotes educational success within non-traditional and marginalized adult populations, an incredible topic for us to talk about today. He earned a BA in mathematics from Chenet University, a master's in science and mathematics from Liberty University, a master's in educational leadership from New York College, and a PhD in education with an emphasis in education administration from Capella University. Dr. Miller is a lead faculty in Ashford's Department of Education and Liberal Arts. Dr. Miller today will present his research to stimulate thinking around what approach works to serve at potential populations and why those approaches work. Dr. Miller's research utilizes findings from data collected from interviews of 1,300 high-achieving men of color. The presentation will also address how to create individual and institution-wide systems that are driven by culturally responsive principles in order to better serve at potential populations. You may post questions in the chat and we will use them to facilitate a question and answer session with Dr. Miller at the end of his presentation. Also, please keep an eye on the chat toward the end of the presentation for a link to an important follow-up survey as we appreciate your feedback. And now, Dr. Newton Miller.
Well, thank you for that introduction, Paul. Definitely a friend of mine. I don't know about the mentor piece. I think it's the other way around. But anyway, I want to thank those of you that are logging on or that are listening to this presentation. It's always an honor to me whenever I'm asked to present or talk at home. When I say home, I'm talking about in our Ashford family. I mean, there's a piece of literature several thousand years old that says a prophet's not without honor except in his own country. If you bring that up into modern day terms, it says you're not an expert unless you live 2 miles out of town. So easily someone could have been called that lived 2 miles out of town, but they decided to ask me to share my thoughts, ideas, and findings. And I don't take that lightly. That's a serious honor to me. So thank you for allowing me to speak today. But I want to say something else just for me. This is for me, to relieve some pressure from me. With our society right now and all that's going on in our civil unrest, I was actually asked to do this presentation a couple of months ago before we had this crescendo of events, with Mr. Floyd and some of the other things that are going on. So my presentation is not really in response to any of the events that are taking place because I had already been asked to do the presentation. So I wanted to kind of relieve that pressure off my shoulders because a lot of people were asking me, saying, I'm waiting to hear what you want to say. So I'm just going to speak frankly. If you don't know me, I'm not that guy that's talking right now, as the black guy that's the representative of how all Black faculty and students might feel at Ashford University. And I'm not going to get into my, my Malcolm, Cleaver, Seal, King, or W.B. Du Bois or Booker T. Washington mode and preach to you today. That's not what this presentation is about. So if that's what you logged in for, you're probably going to be a little disappointed. I'm going to talk to you about some research I did. See, I believe as educators, we have a responsibility to the future. So yesterday happened, and I'm very aware of my history. I know a lot about my history as a Black person, not just from 1619 on, but pre-1619 of the free Black men who existed here in this country prior to slavery. So I'm aware of my history, but it's not a doggone thing I can do about yesterday, no matter how it feels. And what's happening today is already in motion. So whatever I do today is reactionary or responsive to what's already taking place. I believe as educators, our true responsibility and the true strength and what we have to offer our society is how can we affect thinking today so people make decisions today that are going to impact their tomorrow. Because whatever we decide to do today in this pandemic to pandemonium culture in which we're living, it's going to impact and affect our society, everyone, for the next decade or so. So I'm going to speak to what I know as far as principles are concerned, so we can build more culturally responsive systems so that all people of all diverse cultures can have more of an equitable access to mastery, so we can all increase our quality of living. So that's kind of what it's about. I need to say that to get that off my shoulders. Has nothing to do with my research, but thank you for listening anyway. All right, if you don't know me, I'm super ADHD. I might change topic. I talk fast and I'm super expressive. So if that bothers you, hang in there and look at the recording and keep pressing pause and rewind, and maybe we'll connect somewhere in the middle. But I'll try to be cognizant of that because I'm not in the room. I don't see everyone. Usually I'm in the room, I can see the eyebrows wrinkle up, so I know that I'm talking too fast or they don't hear me. So to get started today, you guys, I would be remiss if I didn't mention a few names, like George Floyd or Trayvon Martin, Sandra Bland or Philandro Castile or Stephon Clark or Eric Garner or Freddie Gray or Botham Jean or Breonna Taylor, or the one that, although they're all tragic, the one that pulls on my heartstrings the most is that 12-year-old boy, Tamir Rice. All of those names to me are proof that our country is founded in a systemic system that is built on racial imbalance. Now, the second, I think, most important item of proof to that fact are the history books that describes how the land for America was obtained, or the hands and the backs upon which it was built, and how the laws were formed. But although that's, the reality, and we have this whole pandemic to pandemonium culture going on right now, and the civil unrest is taking place, I'm excited. All those things are disturbing, but I'm excited. I'm excited because everything that's taking place is a signal for change. So I want to see what's about to happen in this experiment that we call democracy. So think about it. Every major change that's taken place on the United States, whether it was women's suffrage or child labor laws or civil rights, they didn't move or have impact or success until there were financial implications to the nation, or some type of hit on our reputation internationally. And if you look around, all those things are taking place. So to me, I think change is on the horizon. And I think as educators, we need to get in place, get poised, and get excited about what the seeds we can plant in the minds of individuals today, so we can affect tomorrow before we even get there. You see, education, I think it was George Washington Carver, he said, education is a doorway to freedom. I know others have said it's a gateway, to the future. However you want to look at it, we're the gatekeepers. As educators, we're the gatekeepers. And we have to view education as that tool that can be used to advocate and empower and amplify the voices, not just our voices in our classrooms and in our institutions, but the voices of all the students that we serve and the people for which we're responsible. See, to me, we have an obligation to uphold to what I call the spirit of education. We have an obligation to stand with those who are seeking social justice and equity in this world where that validation, that dignity wasn't always easily obtainable. So I think the pandemonium the pandemonium culture in which we're living right now is actually a call to action for us as educators. It's a call to action because it presents opportunity for us. Presents opportunity for us to look at our programs and to make them more culturally responsive. It presents opportunity for us to host conversations where we can get courageous about learning and educating each other about one another and being introspective and reflecting upon ourselves at the same time. I think it's an opportunity because we can now lead the way in changing policies and procedures that break all the rules of traditionalism and, step out into a brand new open space so we can create a brand new world, so to speak, And most importantly, I think it's an opportunity to add to the body of how do I want to say it? Scholarly work. That's how I want to say it. It's an opportunity to again amplify the recognition about how the work or the lack of work around DEI, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion, is not only impactful to people of color, but it's impactful to universities and therefore society as a whole. So in order to grab the reins of this dance of change that we're going through and to get busy, if you will, to be able to do something so we can be active in creating this brave new world that stands in front of us, I believe that we need to understand the purpose of education. So my friend here, Paulo Freire, he says that education is going to do one of two things. It's either going to have us conform to the status quo. So we do things as they always were and come up with no creative or viable solutions. Just pretty much go with the flow. Or it's going to liberate us so that we could think a new way and find new solutions and be creative as we participate in transforming our own world, right? And to me, it looks like this. It looks like that fish jumping out the fish bowl. The fish bowl that they were in was full of other fish. Everyone swimming, using the same resources, sharing the same ideas, right? But someone wants to jump out of that bowl, put themselves momentarily in an atmosphere where they are at risk, where they could possibly perish until they drop into a brand new bowl that's empty with clean, fresh water and unlimited resources and room to stretch out and create and innovate and make a new thing. I believe that that is the purpose of education. Now, in order to achieve that, we have to change our view of students as educators. Our students are no longer empty vessels, that come to us as a blank slate. Those were things they used to say to us in teacher training back in the day, right? They came to us empty. They're not empty vessels where we could just turn on the faucet or the spigot and fill it up like we want. And then when we're done, turn it off and pass them on to the next educator. No, they come to us as full vessels with ideas and experiences and things that have shaped them and molded them. They come to us already with a trajectory of culture that belongs to them, that's valuable to them. We see this research as low as all the way back into the pre-K arena. They're seeing that students have already formed a subculture based on what, influences they've had in their families, in their communities. But we have this obligation to give them information, to funnel it into their minds and their brains somehow. But when we assume that they're empty and didn't come to us full, and we will disrespect what is already existing in their lives. We'll disrespect and disregard their culture, their way of life, their thinking, the things that have created the schema or their ability to operate in pedagogy or andragogy or whatever it may be. And in essence, if we're not paying attention to that, we'll damage their minds. to the point where we could cause them to think that they cannot excel or exceed and operate in a fixed mindset instead of a growth mindset, or just basically push back from education, period. So we have to have a different approach that's more holistic, where we look at our students and we take into consideration their lives inside and outside of the classroom, which means we have to respect and adapt our practices based on their culture and not ours. Well, how do we do that? Well, on the right, you have a picture of the metro system in Washington, D.C. There's 5 lines of red, yellow, orange, green, and blue. So I knew they were building another one, but I don't know if they have yet. So this is the picture of the metro when I lived in D.C. Back in the day. So if I was to ask someone, what is the major station, the metro station, on that metro system? They're going to tell me this station right here in the black circle called Metro Center. Now that makes sense. It's the metro system, so Metro Center must be the station, the central station. And that's why they built it. Yes, it is. It's where the offices are and things of that sort. But the fact of the matter is that most of the people, the vast majority of the people that use the metro system, they live in this area, the northeast of DC or southeast of DC. And in these areas, you'll find some neighborhoods that are socioeconomically distressed. So many of the people that live in those neighborhoods on southeast and northeast side of DC, the metro system is their mode of transportation. That's their only mode of transportation. So if I was to ask one of them, what is the main station? They're not going to tell me metro. They're going to tell me this station right here, circled in the white, called L'Enfant Plaza. And when I ask them why, they're going to say, well, I got to get from north to south, and that's the green line. The green line doesn't run through Metro Center. It runs through L'Enfant Plaza. 4 of the 5 stations run through L'Enfant Plaza, where only 3 run through Metro Center. So it's easier for someone in the northeast or southeast of DC to get to where they're going from L'Enfant Plaza than Metro Center. So here's the deal. Whoever I asked, whether they told me Metro Center or L'Enfant Plaza, they were both correct. Neither one was incorrect. They were correct from their vantage point, from their need of the metro system. What am I saying? Translate that to us as educators. We have something to give our students: education, exposure, critical thinking, problem solving. We have something to give our students, but we can't give it to them thinking they're empty and we give it to them on our terms. We have to ask them questions and find out if Metro Center or L'Enfant Plaza is their main station. We have to get on the side of the fence that they're on and view what we want to do for them from our vantage point to make sure that they're able to use it properly. See, if someone from Northeast or Southeast DC needs to get way up here to Greenbelt, and we tell them to go to Metro Center, they now gotta take that train, the red train, to the green line and then transfer. But if I understood where they were and what their plight was, I would have told them to go straight to L'Enfant Plaza, and they could have got anywhere they want to go in one shot. So we have to take a holistic approach, taking into account our students' culture and viewing things from their vantage point to make sure we're telling them the proper station or making sure that we're maximizing what it is that we have to offer. So to do so, I did a study about 4 years ago, and I did 2 rounds of this study. The first round of the study, I was simply wanting to know, what did men of color who were successful in their academic program, and successful meant this: they had a 3.0 or above, and they persisted in their program or graduated from that program at the 125% rate. So I just simply wanted to know, what methods and techniques did you employ so you could obtain and maintain the level of success that you did in your academic program? That's all I want to know. So we did a study. It was about 1,300 men of color who, it was 1,272 exactly, who participated in the surveys and interviews. Those men of color were from 3 different universities. And what I found was 6 techniques or methods that they all utilized. So it was just 6 that were common to all those men of color. Now, this presentation is not about the techniques and methods. I know that is interesting to many of us. I'm talking more about culturally responsive systems, but I'm laying the foundation to show you how this study informed the next study, which will set up the keys that we need to know. At a later date, I will publicize, I'll do some talks about the techniques and methods. But what happened was we found those 6 methods or techniques, and to me, that was too easy, right? So I had a bank of just about 100 men of color who fell below the criteria to be included in the original study. So I gave them the survey just to see. And about 75% of those men of color who weren't deemed successful based on our definition also utilized some combination of those 6 methods or techniques. So that meant that the methods and techniques were not the major driver for the success of the men of color. So now I'm baffled. So what I did was I went back to the study and I looked at it from a different vantage point. And the vantage point that I looked at it from at this point showed me some new things. It showed me that the men of color in that study, 98% of them, I mean, this thing jumped out and punched me right in my big old nose. It just changed how I saw everything. It showed me that 97.8% of those men of color all operated in the same 3 pillars of mind, the same 3 pillars of mind. So before I tell you the 3 pillars of mind, I'll just show you that the top 10, oh, wow, I'm gonna show you the pillars of mind now, I'm sorry. Those same 3 pillars of mind. And those pillars of mind were simple. The first one was simply this. They all had positive experiences in the college, whether it was in academics, student advising, or student support. Here's why this is important. At potential, especially marginalized populations, if there's a bad experience where that population feels as if they're not valued, validated, or wanted, welcome in that organization, it only takes one time for them to put that wall up. And they may not leave the organization, they might still use the service, but now there's a wall up between them and the organization such that now they know where to place it. So whatever rawness or negative experiences they have, they already expect them. So it's a survival skill. You see what I'm saying? So they had positive experiences from the beginning, so that meant they expected positive experiences. They felt welcome and valued and validated in that space. The second pillar was the commitment to their goals, dreams, and aspirations. So this is important. We all have commitments to our goals, dreams, and aspirations. But what was different about these guys was that whatever storms of life came, whatever happened in their life, they would adjust themselves so they could get back front and center with those dreams, goals, and aspirations. See, in this, for instance, in this pandemic, the pandemonium culture that we're in, if I was to interview some of those successful men of color or at potential students, they would tell me what they're doing right now to adjust their life so they could stay on track with their goal. They won't tell me what they're doing to adjust their goal to match the events in their life. They'll do it the other way around because they're committed to those personal goals. They need them. This is where I'm going. This is my reason for being. And the third pillar were obligations. They all had obligations. Everyone did, whether it was financial obligations, whether it was obligations as a caretaker or people that they were, providing for, whether it was career obligations, whatever obligations were on their back, and they were heavy ones. They didn't discount that those obligations had them stretched out financially, had them tired at the end of the day, or pulled in many different directions. They didn't discount or act like that wasn't the case. In fact, what they said was the reason that I'm stretched out, the reason that I'm pulled in many different directions, because that is in my life, I am motivated to obtain my education. So the obligations they use as motivations to move forward. Those 3 pillars were very important in shaping the success of the men of color. So why was this exciting to me? This was exciting because it meant that the techniques and methods were not the major driver for the success of the men of color. It was their own thinking. They already had within them the ingredients necessary to be successful in this arena. all we had to do was match the techniques and methods that we use to their thinking, and we would see them rise and be more successful in everything that they did, right? So these were the 10 high value techniques or methods that we saw. And we came to these conclusions in our study. For those of you that like the statistical methods, we started out with that general linear model so we can kind of narrow down the variables. And when we got to this point, a whole group phenomena took place. So at this point, we used group analysis where we got more mixed methods with quantitative and qualitative, and we put it together so that we can look at implications and work backwards with what students need to come up with techniques and methods that would be powerful for them. And these were the 10 techniques and methods that we saw as powerful for them in order. They're all not in academics, some are in student services, some are in support services. Now the little numbers after them are the mappings to the pillar of minds for the students so they can be successful. I put this same chart, well, I wanted to ask you a question, I'm sorry. And just for time's sake, I was going to ask you which of these are already in play in your department. Just as a conversation starter to wet your whistle, if I'm ever able to come back, or if you join one of my offline sessions where we talk more about techniques and methods. So I put that in the chart for you as well, so you can kind of see the techniques or methods listed here. Sorry for the busy slide. And then the pillars to which they mapped. People can kind of see that more. So this PowerPoint will be available for you to use at a later date. But if I get back on track with those 3 pillars of mine, which is what the Men of Color study pulled out for me that was so powerful, I began to ask the question. So if there's 3 pillars of mine for individuals that help them be successful in their academic programs, are there pillars for systems that define their core values so that the people using those systems can be successful? So I contacted some colleagues of mine from a state university in Colorado that's online, and a university, a historically Black college and university on the East Coast that has some online programs. And we did a series of surveys and interviews. And at this point, we used that whole chi-squared strategy and technique because we now had 2 really distinct categorical variables. And we found out that there was a strong correlation. There was some significant statistical significance in our theory that if there were pillars of mind that individuals built their actions and decisions upon so they could be successful in their programs, that there also were pillars that established the values or the operating procedures for systems so that the people that the system serve could be successful. So I have a question for you. What does a culturally responsive system look like? What does one look like? Now, I don't see the chat, and we can just pretend like I see it or don't see it. But if you type in the chat, when you hear culturally responsive system, what comes to your mind? What are some of the things you think right away? Just type them in there. We'll be able to scroll through that and see it as we go later. There are 3. What we found was that there were 3 pillars, 3 distinct pillars. There were more, but 3 we chose to define culturally responsive systems. And that first pillar was that system, it celebrated, it embraced, it embedded all of the cultural tendencies or the things that each individual culture held near and dear to their heart. They embedded those things into the operations of those systems. So whatever was important to the people being served by that system, the system made sure that those things were a viable part of it. The system didn't make the people fit it. It fit the people. The second pillar was that whatever the service was that system offered, it made sure that it had tools and things in place so that anyone on any level, with any instance or circumstance, was able to access that service with a level of mastery. So for example, me in the classroom, I'm going to put accommodations and things in the classroom so that every student on every academic level, with every experience with the university, whether they're college etiquette, not college etiquette, first time they're into college, whatever the case may be, I'm putting things in my classroom to make sure that there's tools for everyone to access mastery equally, right? The third pillar was that the people that worked in those systems took it upon themselves. I'm gonna say that again, took it upon themselves. That sounds real good. If I was in church, I would say, hunt your neighbor and say, take it upon yourself, right? They took it upon themselves to make themselves responsible for the students or the individuals that they serve in a social, emotional, or academic way. They made themselves responsible. So these are the three pillars for socially, culturally responsive systems that we derived from the study, what we learned from men of color, that these pillars must exist. So in order to build a culturally responsive system, now that we know the pillars, we have to get some keys. So we can get into the meat and potatoes, the nitty gritty, what it is we should consider and not consider so that we can make our systems more culturally responsive. Well, the first key is awareness. We have to be aware. Now, that's not being aware of your students or the constituents that you serve in your system. This means be aware of yourself, right? You gotta acknowledge your own implicit bias, just flat out, just to say it nice and clean and pretty. See, we've all been conditioned, everyone. From the time we were brought on this earth, our conditioning started with the music we heard, the things we saw, the sounds, the body language, the movies, the billboards, what we read, the schools we went to, the people who were around us. We were all conditioned from the time we walked on this planet. That's just the way it is, right? So the way our brain works is and I'm not a brain technology, so for those of you that are out there, you know, be nice to me. But we all have this limbic system, which is in the center of our brain. So from the time we came on this planet, we've been conditioned with experiences and episodes and things, and we've been performing like a hard drive of pictures, if you will, in our brain. So we're going to call them schema. So those schemas sit in our brain somewhere around the hippocampus, somewhere in that area. So when we are confronted with a stimulus, especially one that we didn't expect, right? Our limbic system, our primitive brain, it reaches into those schema, it goes to that Rolodex of schema, and it finds one that matches the stimulus that's taking place, somehow maps to it. And then it tells us what to do, whether to fight or flight, right? So in essence, here's what happens. Stimulus happens, stimulus occurs, our primitive brain looks into pictures from our past and then tells us what to do right now so that we can survive in the future. That's our primitive brain, that's how it works. That's fight or flight reflexive actions. However, we also have a part of our brain, our frontal cortex, our frontal lobe, where our reasoning takes place. Now, all of us, we're educated. They're listening to this presentation. So that primitive brain reflex takes place in us, right? And it comes up and it now, our primitive brain is now telling us to do something based on schema that we had in the past. So it'll tell us, oh, this is good, that is bad. Put these people in this category, put these people in that category. They're doing this, that means ABC. They're doing this, that means DEF. So our brain will then tell us to make a judgment based on what we've seen in the past, but reflexively, without any reason, based on the conditioning that we've had, without any reason. Why am I trying to tell? Why am I saying to you this? Because that initial reflex, that is your implicit bias. That initial, before you start to justify and reason and have the conversation with yourself, that initial feeling where you categorize or lump or make a judgment, that's your initial bias. That's your implicit bias. So we all have implicit bias. So I want to say this to you before you turn me off, because here's the black guy talk about initial implicit bias. Well, we all have implicit bias. Red, brown, yellow, black, and white. We all have an implicit bias. It doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you a human person. But here's the deal. once you're aware of that category, that categorizing that's taking place in your mind, what do you do next? What message do you form next after that? I got to tell you this, I don't have a lot of time. I'm like running out of time. But I had an experience at Ashford where a young black male said to me, he didn't think that I liked black men. And when I asked him why, he said, because I was tougher on them in my courses. So I went back to the courses and looked, and I saw what he was saying was true. So I began to ask myself, why was that? Well, I realized that my father, who was born in 1926 in the South, lived through the Jim Crow laws, lived through segregated schools, fought the segregated Navy. He taught me some things that I needed to know that were based on his upbringing. So he taught me basically, listen, and this is what he said, if your white friend gets 7, you got to get 10 just to be seen, just to get in the room. Not seen as equal, but to get in the room so you have an opportunity to input what you bring to the table. So in essence, what my father was telling me, not to hate or to be separate, he was telling me that you have to work harder because that's the way society is set up. And once you get in the room, you make sure you hold the door open for whoever's next, right? So I realized all that, and I realized that what I was trying to do was help black men in my classroom, right? And I was holding them to this standard, which isn't a bad thing. That's not a bad thing at all, right? But the bad thing was that I was categorizing. I was judging them when I saw a certain instance or a certain activity or a certain lack of activity or a certain behavior. I separated them in 2 categories, and that right there was my implicit bias. Now, I was doing that, not saying that I wasn't going to help either category or still walk 3, 4, 5 miles if necessary with either category that I had divided in my mind, because I was, and I did, and I still do, and always will. But the issue was that I was dividing them. That was my implicit bias. And here's the deal. I was saying that to myself. That was my own categorical division within me. I wasn't, writing it down. Well, I'm putting this one in this category, this one in that category. I wasn't having discussions about it. That was a conversation that happened inside my own mind. But that young man heard it. Why? Because your implicit bias whispers to you, but it's screaming out loud to those to whom it's pointed. So we have to check our implicit bias based on our primitive brain reflexes so we can create prompts that invite students to want to be a part. We have to say things to our students so that we show that we're more like them than we are different. Sharing things like, I went to Aspen so for instance, in our classrooms, and I need to take the time to say this, in our classrooms, we're taught to be, to humanize our classroom here at Aspen, right? Which is a great thing to do. Connect with the students and humanize the classroom. And it's beautiful, but you have to do that from L'Enfant Plaza and not from Metro Station. You have to humanize yourself and connect with your students from their vantage point, not from yours. So many of our students are low socioeconomic status, are marginalized and at potential populations. Many of them don't have the opportunity to go on vacations and things, but I hear many of my colleagues talk about, and I'm not coming down on anyone, I'm going to bring something to your attention. We share with our students, every Christmas, I take my family to Aspen and we go skiing, and on Christmas Eve, we meet in the ski lodge in front of the 15-foot tall Christmas tree and the open fireplace, and we drink hot chocolate and we roast marshmallows. And at 12:01, we share our gifts with each other and give thanks for our ability to be here. And that's a beautiful vacation, one I would like to go on. However, if I'm talking to individuals that do not have that potential, or that's not a reality in their life, I don't really want to share that with them in this setting unless they ask me. I don't want to lead off with that in this setting, because here's what's going to happen. I'm showing them how different I am than them, more than how alike I am with them. Here's another approach. In my classes, I say, listen, I did a degree online. I did a degree online just like you. And when I started that degree, I got a promotion in my job to be a principal of a school, 1,500 middle school students, right? I had 5 children, 1 in elementary, 1 in middle, 2 in high school, 1 in college, and a wife. Man, my life was full. I get it. I know what you're going through. Because I know what you're going through, I have your back. And here are the accommodations and things I'm putting in place in my class because I want you to be successful. So I told them something about me, but I did it from a way that where I'm inviting them to take their wall down and see how alike we are so that they can be successful in the classroom. Key one, awareness. Key two, you got to create a learning partnership. So I just told you, educators go first could be dangerous if you're talking about social things. But if you're talking about academic things, man, it's always positive. I tell my students first off, listen, man, I do not like to grade papers. I never did in my career. I hated it. I used to pay my kids when I taught high school to grade my math and science papers. Right? So I tell my students right away, listen, whenever I grade something, send it back to you, I need your help. I need you to look at what I graded and make sure I didn't make any mistakes because I don't like to grade. And I tend to make mistakes when I grade. So I want you to look it over to make sure that it's all good because I want you to get your full credit. And if it's a problem, I want you to contact me. Here, you have my cell phone number. You have my email. Contact me, call me so we can talk about it. Now, many times they call me and it wasn't a mistake, but we had a wonderful conversation, which ramped up their understanding of the content because we were now able to talk on the higher Bloom's level. And we created a relationship between each other where now the wall was down and they're going to contact me as soon and as often as they need me and be more successful. Be transparent, levels the field for them. Let them know you're a partner, you care for them, but at the same time, you're challenged. For example, some of the things that are in the classroom for me that it makes it culturally responsive is I don't accept papers that don't have subheadings. We do all this work in the development process, the backwards design our process. We start with assessment goals and we make these rubrics and then we work backwards to create a class. So when you do your paper, there's a definite rubric there for you. So make your headings in your paper according to those rubrics. So I don't have to guess where your transitions are, and so that your writing can be more condensed, on point, and easy to follow, so that you get a higher grade, not just with me, but with everyone else. So I share that with my students. I won't grade it. I send it back with a 0 on it. And I'll say, listen, when you put your headings in, look at the example I provided. When you put your headings in, send it back to me. I'll change your grade. So first, usually cause a little angst at first, but once they get it, they like it and they love it. And I've had students call me back after the class, say, oh, that helped me in the next class. Well, of course it did, because I care about you. That's why I'm challenging you. See, we're the facilitators. So we got to learn how to shrink and validate what our students bring to the table. It's all about furthering their critical thinking. See, because when we do that, that value that we placed in our students, when we created that partnership, it breeds a self-efficacy. And self-efficacy, that's the seeds for growth mindsets. And if we can establish growth mindsets in our students, man, the sky's the limit for them. So our third key is accommodations, accommodations, accommodations. So real quick story, there was two men that went to Lowe's. I think I told this story before in the presentation here at Ashford. So they went to a Lowe's, they both won a shed, a utility shed for their backyard. All the pieces, all the nails and everything. It was delivered to their houses. Now, one of the men grew up in a house where his father was handy, had tools, they fixed things, repaired things, built things, so that was his culture. Now he has his own house, he has tools, fix things, build things, that's his culture. This other young man, he didn't grow up in that type of scenario. So now in his house, he doesn't have any tools or anything. He calls someone to do everything, right? So the one man that grew up with the tool culture, he built his shed on a Saturday morning, got up, took him about 3 hours. He went down to check on his buddy down the street. When he walked in his room, the buddy had his hand in his head, shaking his head. He was all distraught. I mean, it was pieces of the utility shed all over the yard, nothing built. So you know what that man with the tools did? He turned around, didn't say anything to his friend. He turned around, went back to his house and got all the tools necessary. He came back to his friend's house and he walked in the yard. He said, can I teach you, can I help you put your shed together? And the man was like, sure, right? So what he did was he started teaching him how to use the tools. So after teaching him how to use a few of the tools, his buddy said, I thought you were gonna help me put the shed together. He said, I am. So after he showed him how to use the last tool, he left his tools and he left. He said, I'll be back in a few hours to check on you. He came back in a few hours and that shed was built. Why? Because that man had the proper tools to do so. Accommodations are the tools that we need to build and scaffold learning. Everyone comes at a different level with different experiences. with a different level of motivation, a different openness. There's all kinds of differences. So the accommodations that we put in place are the tools to help them build the shed. It addresses all the diverse academic, social, and environmental needs that all of those students or people that come to you as counselors need addressed. Accommodations let us skip to the good stuff. We go past the little tiny stuff. I taught a calculus class once where the students were great in calculus in inner city Philadelphia. They were great in calculus, but they were horrible at negative numbers and fractions and exponents. So I said, why are you wasting your time on that? You're great at the calculus, just use the calculator to do the arithmetic, and we can get through the calculus. It lets us skip through the good stuff so we can get to the analysis and the synthesis and the evaluation modes of Bloom's taxonomy. So in essence, when you adjust to meet the cultural needs of the students because you put accommodations in place, what you're doing is you're increasing the rigor of the classroom. You're not taking it down, you're increasing the rigor because now you can talk about higher level things. And you make that course more relevant to the student because now they see where it matches. They see what they can do. So they're more apt to try and to push forth and to give you better. So that's key 3. And key 4, and I am into my question answer time, but key 4 basically is create a community of learners. Community of learners is very important for at potential marginalized populations. So I'm gonna lead off with this. Why is it so important? Because community is it's a survival skill. It's a way that at potential and marginalized populations survive. Because of the oppressions, because of the misunderstandings, because of some of the imbalance and inequity in our systems that exist in our world here in the United States, community is how at potential populations and marginalized populations survive. So creating a community of learners is so important. And you start by empowering everyone. What do I mean by empowering everyone? You find ways that each individual, especially at potential individuals, can contribute not to just their own learning path, but to the learning path of those around them. You empower them to help themselves and to help others, whether it's in academics or whether it's in advising or in support services. Find a way to empower them to contribute to everyone's learning path. And you do that by kind of creating routines in the classroom so that they, or in the arena, the system, so that they can work together somehow and rely on each other somehow. But by using those tools, those accommodations we mentioned in key 3. So you create routines around those tools. So now everyone's focusing on mastery because the tools are about you being able to accomplish the task, build the shed. So you empower everyone to help each other, and then you create routines so they can use tools to build the shed, and the shed gets built. So this is how you establish high expectations. But here's the deal, something I think many of us as educators don't know, and I'm getting excited, I gotta calm down, that we establish a bar, and that's the initial baseline expectation. We cannot establish high expectations for individuals because we have to know that what that individual sees in themselves as their own level of potential. High expectations are established by individuals from the individual. We just set the bar for the expectations for this environment. So that means we have to find ways to ramp up our conversations with individuals around their ideas, concepts, and beliefs and values and things that are within them so they can see their own strengths and power, so they can see their own potential. And we do that by having them create communities of learners, work in a community of learners so that they can share what they know and don't know, so they can see their learning process take place. In essence, what we're doing is we're teaching them how to create a growth mindset within themselves. From that point, they will then establish the level of expectation, which is considered high from them. And then all you do is facilitate that discussion. You speak life to their strengths, and you speak possibilities to their weakness. So that community of learners is operating as an entity, but individually as setting high expectations for themselves. So everything is moving forward. In essence, you become that gateway that we talked about in the beginning of the presentation. You become that gateway that holds the door open and either grabs people by the hand and pulls them through the door, or just holds it open while they walk through, or it holds it open and stands in the door to make sure they don't come back out and go back to where they were. You create the cycle as an educator. So real quick, I want to recap. Education, we talked about Paulo Freire and said that education is meant to liberate and not to conform. It's meant to open up ideas so that we can participate in the transformation of our world. Think differently, do differently, throw out the traditions. Let's take the opportunity as educators in this time to create culturally responsive systems that open up the doors of opportunities of what's about to happen in this next wave of our experiment called democracy. We looked at the men of color research and saw how it established pillars of mind for individual men of color to be successful in their academic programs, and how that mapped to systems. If it worked for individuals, it worked for systems. So systems had pillars upon which they stood so that they could successfully serve the individuals that were utilizing the system. But in order to build the culturally responsive system, we needed to know some keys. So we took some time to talk about those 4 keys, which were awareness of yourself and your implicit bias, so you can create, you can change with your frontal lobe. If you don't change, then having implicit bias is a problem. If you recognize your implicit bias and change, that's not a problem at all. We all do that, right? So you take that implicit bias and be aware of it so you can invoke positive conversations from your students that make them want to be a part and not be pushed away. Show them how sane you are rather than different, and create that safe learning space. That learning space that's open for everyone to explore and to learn by using tools that accommodate for any gaps or weaknesses or strengths that may take place, so everyone can build the shed. And then most importantly, understand that community is a survival skill for at potential populations. It's something that's totally understood and totally needed. So you create the community. You let them lead in creating that community. You just establish the format, the place for it. And that community will morph into greater expectations as individuals buy into that community. So I'm going to stop right here. If you look at the PowerPoint, you will see that there's more slides later, because those slides talk about the PLC process, and that's how you build these culturally responsive systems. I am like 8 minutes over where I was supposed to stop. Let's see if we have some questions and answers. Paul, do you want me to stop sharing, or how do you want me to do this?
Well, I can ask you these questions that have been posted already, and then you can respond.
Okay. I'm going to leave my slide up with my contact information for anybody who has questions we didn't get to, and some things that I do outside to kind of talk more about the techniques.
You bet. You bet. First question from an Ashford student who is watching your presentation today. What is the simplest way that educators create a curriculum which incorporates cultures and current day events that promote thought and also ensure that retainment of materials? I am a student, have felt as though I am supposed to put aside what is happening in the world when entering the online classroom and responding to discussion points and assignments.
Okay. So first of all, education, like I said, is universal thinking. As Paulo Freire, our friend, says, that education liberates. It doesn't teach conformity. So in many, I think it's parts to your question. In many online environments, some universities have a static online environment with master course shells, kind of like Ashford does. Other universities don't do that, where teachers build their online environment, and they have, they can change things within Canvas if that's what they're using, or mind maps, or whatever whatever their platform is. The deal is this: here at Ashford, we have a static model where questions are being asked and answered, and it's kind of already set in place. That does not mean that in your response, you cannot integrate and embed current events, social events. Even though the question may not mention them, if you see a connection in them, you're going to want to, as an instructor, a professor, I want you to put that in there, because that shows me that you're operating on that higher Bloom's level. You're able to analyze and evaluate and synthesize, which means create, put things together on a higher level. That's going to show me that not only do you grasp the content, that you're thinking ahead, your critical thinking is so far ahead that you're going to be able to teach or instruct or help somebody else or guide or facilitate a discussion about that content with someone else. So that's one side of the question, as you being a student. But say you were an educator and you needed to create a culturally responsive curriculum, is what I'm hearing you ask me. Well, if you're on the K-12 level, you got to start with whatever standards are there. So you start with your standards and then you work backwards. So as you work backwards from the standards are the things that are going to be assessed. So as you work backwards from the standards, you're able to implant or integrate or input any content or activity that you want. So the standard is not the topic or the content. If I want to say the standard is to talk about genres in poetry, I don't know. I don't know a lot about poetry. That might even be a good topic. I might know it exists, but just flow with me for a minute here. So say the topic is genre in poetry, right? I can then choose what I want to put in there in my walk for my students to be able to master that content. So I start with the standard, and then I start what we call backwards design, working backwards. So maybe I want them to know something urban. Maybe I want them to know something rural. Maybe I want them to know something controversial. So I throw in something about Gandhi or women's suffrage or civil rights, you know. So what you address in the content is up to you as a teacher. Just that standard that you want them to master at the end, that's usually what's defined for you on the K-12 level. On the college level, we call them course learning objectives or program learning objectives. And it's the same model. You start with what you want them to master, which is broad. And then you start putting things in that would touch each culture, each individual, bring engagement and interest. So long answer, but I hope I got both of them. You're a student, so you always get preference over my long answers.
Well, and another question came in. What do you mean with by the phrase "at potential students"?
So I do not believe in calling people at risk. At potential is a phrase that I'm trying to coin. I say it at every conference where I speak. I speak at a lot of community colleges, community-based organizations, some other universities that do some PDs and things for that, professional developments. I believe that when we call a student at potential, or we see that, at risk, and we see that in writing, you're looking at it from a deficit standpoint. That's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. I'm telling you, you're at risk. So that's not where my mind is. So if I want to establish a growth mindset for someone, as an educator, my job is to help cultivate you, which means to take you from one state of being to another. If I want that state of being to be upward and not a downward trajectory, then I'm not going to call you a negative thing. I'm going to call you at potential. I see you from the top down, not the bottom up. So at potential is just another way for more traditional folks to say at risk. I just switch it around because I'm not so concerned with your risk. I'm more concerned with your potential.
Awesome. Are there similar ideas seen in the research surrounding women of color?
So I did not capture data with women of color. I captured data for research, so I can't answer your question with any amount of integrity. I can guess, right? But let me tell you why I chose men of color, because and I don't know if I said this in the presentation or not, but from PK to 16, so that's pre-K through a bachelor's degree, For the last 20 years, if you look at any state battery, national battery, any standardized exam that was given, the lowest level, the two groups that perform the lowest level are, well, it's men of color, but it's Hispanic men and Black men are at the bottom of the rung of that ladder, and it has been for 20 years. So I chose to operate with men of color, not just because I happen to be a man of color. So, I mean, I'm gonna be honest with you, I have a bend towards being a man of color. I happen to like being a man of color. So I chose them because if we could find ways that the most difficult and lowest performing population can be successful, and we can take those ways and we can find the implications for them in our systems, we can make it not just so that that population will be successful, but every other population can ramp up their level of success as well. So I don't have an answer to your question, and I wanted to explain why I have never expanded my study to look at any other group other than men of color, because until they stop being the lowest performing, I think that's who I need to look at, because I need to know how to make things better.
Great. Well, we have come to the end of our time, and
I was liking the questions.
would you like, well, we can answer, well, I could give you a couple more. Here we go.
That's up to you. You got the time. You're the timer.
So another question was, how can educators and students create more room for communication in an online program?
So I'm going to make sure I understand the question. More room for communication, meaning interaction between professors and students in a synchronous manner. Is that what they're saying? Okay. So in addition to the things that we already have in place, so I've had a little exposure to some other universities and some new things that we're doing actually here at Ashford. So a lot of universities, you know, of course, you got the email and you got the in-course chat or inbox. You know, you have those things. You got the small informal cohorts that I always suggest to my students do that. Create informal cohorts. So meaning this, if you know you see someone in your class and you know that you guys are in the same major, talk to each other and find out how far you are in your program, and try to get your courses sequenced together so you can stay together. You know, talk to your advisors or whatever the system is at your university, and sync yourself together so you can support each other along the way. If you can get 4 or 5 of you to do that, that's a fabulous cohort. So other than those ways, which take some effort, using the technology, for instance, in one of the programs that we Ashford, it's not student facing yet, so I won't mention the name of the program, right? We use, there's a synchronous component. So each week there is a synchronous meeting that takes place using Zoom. So that meeting is the kind of like the recitation or the seminar portion of that course. So in that particular course, they do some work where they record that work, and we can look at their standards, their meeting standards, and then they come together once a week, and they talk about their experiences and a specific topic that they're going to need to know to be able to continue to do the work that we're recording and grading them on. So those synchronous sessions, I believe, are a great way to connect, whether it's once a week or once every other week. Some of the issues that we face is that some of the students are in one time zone and another time zone. So that the instructors, they find that information out first. So if they have 20 students, what they do is they break their students up into time zones, and they create synchronous sessions, maybe 2 or 3 synchronous sessions each week. So they work with smaller groups within the class. But right now, I think that the best possible way to have direct contact within the classroom are those, adding a synchronous component. Zoom, it's easy. It doesn't have to be super formal or around a great topic. It can be something you just open up and say, students, you want to come in, hey, I was thinking about such and such. Let's talk about it. People are having problems with week 3 assignment. I'm gonna come on and talk about it. Then you record that and you send it out. And students will also contact you from there. I think another thing that we should all do, I recommend, is it was in the presentation, but I didn't cover it because I didn't want to get bogged down. But one of the techniques or methods that we found that were high power was a connectivity. So any technique that you can use to keep students connected to the university or your class is fabulous. So one of the ones we decided in our program is to give students our number. So they text us. So some associate faculty don't want to do that. Well, there's things, is it Google Talks? There's a couple of apps that you can use where the student contacts the app and the app contacts you like a text. So in essence, it makes the student feel like they can contact you as soon or as often as they need you. So I'm talking in circles now, but hopefully I threw some ideas out there that might spark some something greater than just what Newt Miller's doing.
Yep. Another great question earlier in the chat was, what would be your recommendations for faculty to address their own stereotypes of men of color?
Well, I think the first step is, so let me say it like this. How do you do that is how. So how, H-O-W, acronym how, H-O-W, stands for honest, open, and willing. So anytime we're doing self-work, which is the greatest work, by the way, self-work is the greatest work. Whenever we're doing self-work in any topic, any area, any arena, whatever it is, you want to exercise, whatever it is, whenever it's self-work, you got to get honest, open, and willing. That's how you move forward. How is how. So you got to get honest with where you are or where you're not. You have to pay attention to, like I said, those, those initial reflexes and responses. I had no clue that I was sending out a message to Black males that I was biased against them. I mean, everything I was doing was so that I can build a system, a connection, motivate, pull forward Black males. So when I heard that, it broke me. But I had to do the work and I had to go find out, is there truth in this? So I started with looking at my courses and I got honest with my responses. Like, yeah, this was kind of harsh compared to that one. And they did say the same thing, So that honesty piece is the work that happens when no one's around. You can't ask anyone. There are really no guidelines on how to do it. It's you having that conversation with yourself and being okay with you telling yourself, you know what, Newt, that was messed up, man. Yeah, Newt, you have a problem and you need to address that problem. And then the open part, which is the second phase, is where you have to consciously get around people, listen to, you got to change your diet. You got to change what's going in your ears because that's what's affecting you or what you're around. So you have to intentionally get around people or listen to things and ideas so you can get more information. You got to be open to new ideas, new approaches, new avenues, new things. And then the last step is you have to be willing to do the work to make the change. So don't just look at any self-work that you ever do from the standpoint that I'm just going to walk in and change myself. That's too big. It's too large. It's too much of a task. You'll get discouraged. You have to break it in pieces. And I think that the 3 most effective pieces are that honest, open, and willing approach. So when I say the open piece, because I'm talking to educators, you gotta be open to different literature, to different talks and different, just kind of listen to stuff, get some information. And I'll be honest with you, a lot of the stuff I read and listen to, I don't like. I don't even necessarily all the way agree with all of it. But I listen to it, I hear it, and I understand that I don't have the only experience. I don't have the only vantage point. I know it has worked for me or worked for me helping others, but I don't have the corner of the market. So I force myself to, I like to say, eat the fish and spit out the bones. So because there's some meat, there's something in, I'm not being exposed to things by accident. Everything is for a reason. So I make that reason positive and work for my benefit. So I hope I'm answering your question. Of course, you can see that's a passion of mine. Self-work is the best work. And again, you have my contact information on the screen. I'm always willing to talk further about those kind of things. What else do you have for me, Paul, or are we done? It's up to you,
No,
sir.
we've got a couple more. So a number of questions about synchronous sessions. How do you approach those with students having schedule conflicts, or, you know, and do you use those synchronous sessions in grading?
Okay. So I'm right on the edge talking right here, okay? Because the program where we have used that, we have not opened up to students yet. It's not outside facing. We're waiting on some approvals from the Department of Education, but we have run this program internally, meaning internal students, whole nother story. So I'm saying that, I'm prefacing with that, because I don't want you to go start looking through stuff and trying to find this program, because you're not gonna find it. But here's how we work it. And I learned this from some colleagues of mine, some other universities. First of all, the schedule piece. The schedule piece, if you are a nationwide university where you serve students in three, in all, is it 3 or 4, whatever the time zones are, right? You have to adjust to the student. You cannot, even by law, make them adjust to you. Well, in good conscience, and you can by law, but in good ethics, make them adjust to you, unless they are international. So if they're international, you can't keep adjusting your time zone to meet the international students. We try to keep it internal, because that's where our right now 6 regional creditors kind of oversee the higher ed arena. So what do I mean by you adjust to them? So like I said earlier, say you had 20 students in the classroom and you had students from all time zones. And part of this particular program, there's a synchronous, weekly synchronous session, which is the seminar for a portion of the course. And this is actually a state mandated requirement, right? So it's not just something we chose to do, it's a state mandated requirement in order for them to finish the program accurately, fully. So what we do is that instructor will get information from those students to find out what time zone they're in, right? And then they will have more than one weekly session. So so they'll have one at different times during the day, so that they can match the times of the students that they're serving. So that's one way we account for that. For students that have unforeseen schedules that come up because they have swing shifts or things like that that they have to maintain, for their living. I talked about holistic approach inside the class and outside the class. So if their work shift gets changed, or they got to work that extra shift, or whatever the case happens, and they can't make that synchronous session, what we've done is we said, okay, there's 6 weeks in this course, this grad course we're talking about. You need to make a certain number of the sessions. If you miss a session, we record it, and here's an assignment that goes along with that recording, which basically makes them really kind of summarize the session, because all I really want you to do is participate in that discussion and know what was said, because the information from your peers is going to help you. So that's kind of how we handle those things for scheduling. Do we make it graded? Yes, we treat it like a discussion. We treat it like a discussion question where they are in that session, and then there's some written requirement of the session itself, usually around the extra topic that we want to talk, that we want to speak about, or something that stood out to them in the session, to make sure that we have not just to make sure we have something written as a record of it, and to make sure that we've hit all modalities as far as training with that synchronous session is concerned. So hopefully I didn't ramble too much on you with that one, but that's how we handle them. And I think that is probably the way that we're going to kind of, I'm going to say, spread the mayonnaise on the whole slice of bread until there's some other tool that comes out to be able to do that.
We'll give you one final question here. How do we connect with our students to learn their own level of expectation? How do we help them expand that level of expectation?
So that's kind of tough to do in the online arena with every student. That happens more sporadically in the online level, not because it's online, but because our courses are so short. Again, like I said, I think that the best way to build relationship with students in the online arena where it's such a short course is to focus on the things that we have in common. And the things we have in common in the class is the class. So most students in the online arena, especially those from socioeconomically distressed or at potential populations, they're taking the course because they need the credits to get the degree, which is going to help them apply for another job to make more money so they can change their quality of living for them and be an example for their family. So that's really what they're here for. They're really not here because Mr. Miller's a cool dude, So
and you are.
They want. I'm in the way. I'm in the way of what they need to do next, right? So I can either be in the way, or I can be a facilitator holding the door open along the way. So that's the mentality that I take. So in answering your question, my connection with my students, because I'm assuming I'm talking to an educator here, is around that course and that content. And it's around what's happening in the course. It's around how can I support you to keep moving. It's around these accommodations that I already put in place that you can use if you need them or if you don't need them. It's around those things. And then other than that, I'm silent. So what kind of happens is conversations take place. So a student will say they need an extension on a discussion or assignment or something, right? My only rule is you can have an unlimited extension in my class. I don't care. Just let me know ahead of time. Don't tell me after. Tell me before, right? So that's just me. You don't have to do that. That's just me. So what it does is it sparks a conversation. Dr. Miller, such and such is happening, da 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 da. So they tell me something about themselves. Now they've opened the gate. Now I respond with a conversation, about that thing that they just, and it's usually something motivating, or maybe I have an example or experience that is similar. And so then I know how to connect with them on that personal level. So once that takes place, now I have permission. I want to say that again. Now I have permission to speak into them about strengths and weaknesses that I'm noticing in the work that they're submitting or in their patterns or habits. I do not speak to those things until I get permission. So I get permission, and I always get permission because I went first and put those accommodations out there first. The accommodations are not secrets in my class. Their first announcement they get is about late discussions and late assignments, how I have an unlimited relaxed deadline. I just need you to tell me first. So, and how I have examples of every assignment. Every assignment you have, I'm gonna give you an example or two so you can see what it looks like before you start yours, because this is my lowest level of expectation. From there, you can jump it up. So that's when I start to see the potential. That's when I start to see the motivation. That's when I start to see the thought process or the writing abilities or skill sets that each student has. Then I can speak to those things individually to the students. So I don't know if you kind of followed that picture right there, but that's how I do it. I trick them. I trick them into telling me something about themselves, and then I play judo with that momentum.
Yeah, that is a tremendous analogy and a great way to finish. Thank you, Dr. Miller, for a very timely presentation, and really to everyone attending this June colloquium. And please complete the follow-up survey, which has been posted in the chat. The survey will also be available with the recording of this presentation on the AU CETL YouTube channel. We'll email it directly to all of you who have attended, and it'll be found on the CETL website as well. And also,
am I allowed to tell them to buy my book?
Oh yeah, that's right. Please.
I already said it.
Go for it.
Why Some Seeds Don't Grow. It's available on Amazon, you guys. Please get the book.
Yeah. One more time. What's the title?
Why Some Seeds Don't Grow.
Okay.
So it's 10 principles for educating, mentoring, and parenting urban youth. So it's really about youth, but I think the principles also apply to some of our adult students as well.
No, perfect. And in fact, that was one question I missed. Is Dr. Miller going to mention his book? So there you go.
Well, I just did. There you go.
Okay.
Put it there.
There we go.
Oh, no.
So stay tuned to your email inbox and the CETL website and the CETL social media for details about the next quarter's CAS Colloquium presented by Dr. Yvonne Lozano. She's the department chair and professor in the university's health science department on the subject of teaching and learning with a multi-generational perspective. That should be really good.
Yeah, yeah.
So again, Newton, thank you so much. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Stay healthy and happy this summer.
All right. Have a great day, sir.
Thank you.